He cheated. Not in a dramatic way. There was no confession, no messages, no fight. I realized it when I stopped being included. This is how he replaced me quietly. Throwaway because a few people know my main. My life with Mark looked calm from the outside. The apartment stayed clean, the schedule predictable, the days arranged like items on a shelf. Morning coffee, work, dinner, sleep, repeat. I called this stability for years and defended it whenever doubt appeared. Mark was consistent in ways people admire. He woke early, paid bills ahead of time, planned weeks forward, remembered birthdays, and never missed appointments. He did not shout, disappear, or embarrass me publicly. He valued order, reputation, and being seen as reasonable. With him, chaos felt excluded. At first, that steadiness felt like safety I could lean against. What changed was subtle, never dramatic. Closeness thinned quietly. Conversations stayed polite but shallow. Touch became functional, almost scheduled. Silence stopped feeling intimate and started feeling empty. I adapted without protest, telling myself this was adulthood, not loss. There was no obvious problem to confront. Everything worked, which became the problem. Our life ran efficiently, smoothly, without space for me to expand or disrupt it. I learned to fit myself inside his structure, believing patience meant love, believing silence was neutral there. Mark liked to describe our relationship as easy. He said we never fought, and that meant we were mature. I believed him because conflict made him uncomfortable, and I learned early that calm kept everything running smoothly. Whenever I raised a concern, he listened politely, nodded, and changed nothing afterward. He handled plans the same way. Trips were booked, schedules adjusted, decisions finalized, and then explained to me later as if I had agreed. At first, it felt efficient. Eventually, it felt like being informed of my own life. I stopped offering opinions because they slowed him down. Friends praised him constantly. They called him stable, dependable, husband material. He smiled at those words and carried them carefully, like proof of his worth. I watched how much that image mattered to him. Being right, being reasonable, being admired came before being close. I tried to adapt. I matched his pace, softened my edges, organized myself into something easier to manage. I became quieter, smaller, more agreeable. The less space I took, the more comfortable he seemed. That should have scared me sooner, but I mistook comfort for love and compliance. The first signs were small enough to ignore if I wanted to. His schedule changed without explanation. Meetings ran late more often. Plans shifted at the last minute, and I learned about them after the fact. When I asked questions, he answered calmly, reasonably, as if the confusion was mine. He started guarding his time with precision. Everything had a place, and I no longer fit neatly into it. Dinners were rushed, conversations were trimmed down to essentials. He listened, but only enough to respond, not enough to engage. I noticed how quickly he redirected things back to logistics. I began to feel like an interruption rather than a partner. My presence required adjustment, and adjustments annoyed him. I adapted by asking less, expecting less, needing less. I told myself relationships changed, that this was normal, that closeness naturally faded. But the rhythm was wrong. It didn't slow down, it rerouted. His energy went somewhere else, and I was left with the quiet aftermath. I couldn't name what was happening yet, but I could feel the absence forming, steady and deliberate, long before I admitted what it meant. There was no single moment where everything clicked. It was a gradual alignment of details that refused to stay separate anymore. The way he checked the time before answering questions, how his attention drifted even when we were alone, how conversations ended the second they stopped being practical. He stopped sharing things that mattered. Stories from his day became summaries. Emotions were replaced with conclusions. I realized I knew his schedule better than his thoughts. When I spoke, he listened with the patience of someone waiting for a meeting to end. I noticed how carefully he protected certain hours. Not aggressively, just firmly. As if those parts of his day were no longer available for discussion. I wasn't suspicious yet. I was confused. Confusion feels quieter than jealousy. It makes you doubt your own instincts. I tried to reconnect in small ways, suggested dinners, asked open questions, slowed my pace to match his. Nothing worked. He wasn't resisting me. He was already somewhere else. And the most unsettling part was how natural it seemed to him, how little effort it took to keep me at the edges of his life. I didn't discover the truth through evidence. There were no messages to read, no calls to overhear, no sudden confession that forced clarity. What I had instead was behavior. Consistent, repeated, undeniable behavior. It told a story he never said out loud. He stopped reacting to my absence. When I came home late, he didn't ask where I'd been. When I grew quiet, he didn't notice. I realized that my presence or absence no longer affected the rhythm of his life. That was when the word cheating first crossed my mind, not as an accusation, but as an explanation. I tested it quietly. I stopped adjusting myself to his schedule. I stopped filling silences. Nothing changed. He continued as before, unbothered. That's when I understood that whatever he was doing elsewhere had already replaced me functionally. I didn't feel shocked. I felt confirmed. The pieces aligned into something complete and disappointing. It wasn't that he had chosen someone else in a moment of weakness. It was that he had already moved on, and I had been living in the delay between that decision and its consequences. The emotional shift didn't arrive as anger. I kept waiting for it, almost expecting rage to justify leaving. Instead, what came was a hollow clarity, a sense that something had ended long before I noticed the ending. I was late to my own conclusion. I looked back and saw how carefully he had managed the transition. There was no chaos, no guilt spilling over. He compartmentalized his life the same way he organized his days. Clean lines, no overlap. I was phased out, not abandoned. Replaced without confrontation. What hurt most was how little resistance there was. No struggle, no hesitation. He didn't seem torn. He seemed relieved, as if removing me from the equation simplified things. That realization stripped away the last illusion I was holding on to. I understood then that this wasn't about desire or temptation. It was about control, about maintaining an image while rearranging reality quietly. He didn't need drama. He needed efficiency, and I no longer fit into the version of himself he was maintaining. The emptiness stayed. Not dramatic, not consuming, just steady. And once I named it, I couldn't unsee it. I stopped trying to fix things after that. Not because I gave up, but because I finally understood there was nothing left to repair. You can't restore something that's already been replaced. You can only pretend not to notice the gap where you used to be. I paid attention to myself for the first time in months. How tired I was. How careful I had become. How much of my energy went into staying unobtrusive. I had shaped my life around not disturbing him, and somehow called that love. There was a strange calm in recognizing the truth. No panic, no urgency, just a quiet acceptance that this version of my life was over. I didn't need answers from him anymore. His behavior had already explained everything clearly. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. I stopped imagining apologies that would never come. The story ended without a final scene, and I had to be okay with that. Closure didn't arrive through words. It arrived through absence. Once I let go of the need to be chosen, the silence felt different, less heavy, more honest. Clarity changed the way I moved through the days. I stopped monitoring his moods, stopped adjusting my schedule to anticipate his. The constant analysis that had lived in my head finally went quiet. There was nothing left to decode. The pattern was complete. I noticed how much space returned the moment I stopped shrinking. Simple things felt different. I slept deeper. I ate without rushing. I could sit in silence without wondering if it annoyed someone. It wasn't happiness yet. It was neutrality, and neutrality felt like relief. I realized how long I had been negotiating my own presence, asking myself to be easier, quieter, less demanding. I had learned to translate his comfort into my responsibility. Seeing that clearly made staying impossible. I didn't feel the need to confront him. Confrontation would have been another form of participation. Another attempt to matter inside a system that had already excluded me. I wasn't interested in explanations or apologies shaped to protect his image. The decision formed slowly but firmly. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt final. Once it existed, everything else became logistics. Leaving didn't come with a speech. There was no moment where I listed everything he had done wrong. I didn't ask him to explain himself or admit anything. By then, explanations felt pointless. They would have been shaped to preserve his calm, his logic, his sense of being reasonable. I packed slowly. I chose what to take and what to leave behind without emotion. Objects lost their weight once the meaning was gone. The apartment stayed as orderly as always. Nothing dramatic marked the change. That felt appropriate. When I told him I was leaving, I kept my voice neutral. I didn't accuse him. I didn't ask questions. He looked surprised, not because he didn't understand, but because he hadn't planned for this version of the outcome. I was supposed to stay manageable. He tried to respond carefully, choosing words that sounded fair. I stopped listening halfway through. The decision had already detached itself from the conversation. Whatever he said existed too late to matter. Walking away felt quieter than staying. There was no victory in it, just a steady sense of alignment, like finally stepping out of a space where I had been holding my breath. After I left, I didn't feel lighter right away. There was no rush of freedom or sudden clarity about who I was supposed to become next. What I felt was space, unoccupied space. It was unfamiliar, but it belonged to me. I understood then that the worst part of what he did wasn't the affair itself. It was the quiet certainty that he believed I would accept being replaced without resistance, that I would stay reasonable, convenient, silent. He had counted on my patience. He thought the transition would go unnoticed, that I would remain in the background while his life rearranged itself. He was careful, efficient, discreet. He did everything right according to his own logic. What he didn't plan for was my exit, not because it was dramatic, but because it was final. I didn't need to be chosen to leave. I didn't need confirmation or permission. I only needed to stop making myself fit where I no longer belonged. I didn't take revenge. I didn't expose him. I didn't correct the story he tells about himself. I simply removed myself from it. He thought he could replace me quietly. I left without asking to be chosen.